All right, well, welcome. It's a real pleasure to be here with you this morning, and thank you for those of you who attended my previous session who decided you'd come back for a second round. Really appreciate you coming. My name's Connie Carter, and just quickly, I've been working in the nonprofit sector my whole life. For the last 17 years or so, I've had my own business, Sylvia and Carter and Associates, which is on the business card I handed out. And we do consulting work with nonprofit organizations, many of which are here in Chester County. We also do work throughout Pennsylvania and Delaware, primarily helping organizations do what they do, but do it better. Well, I know you saw this, you probably saw this in your earlier session, so I'm not to worry, I am not going to go into detail on this thing. But basically, as we talk about life cycles of nonprofits and how the board roles and activities need to change as a nonprofit matures and grows, these 7 items continue to be front and center regardless of how big or how small your organization is. So they're important just to think about, because even if you're in a tiny, tiny organization and your board may have 5 people on it, you need to be doing all 7 of those. And if you're in a 30, 40, 50-year organization with a very extensive board and a huge professional staff, you need to be doing all 7 of those. The issue is that how you implement those, how you execute those 7 responsibilities will look, or should look, very different depending on where your organization is. So that's just a quick overview with the legal, building and recruiting the board, mission planning, assets, fiscal oversight, fundraising, being an ambassador, and your collaboration and work with the executive director. So those are the 4 basic ones. Now there are a number of different graphics for how these life cycles are lined out. And there's a number of them in your packet. And just what I would say, because I think I'm maybe not a visual learner, I look at something like this and I go, I just glaze over. I'm like, what? Pick one if you pick one that works for you, and don't worry if it's just totally confusing. I'm going to explain the concepts. If the graphics help, that's great. If they don't, forget the graphics. It doesn't matter. So the concept here is that nonprofits, just like people, grow and develop as they mature through their life cycles, and by reaching developmental milestones. And each successive stage builds on the accomplishments and the growth of the prior stages. And as this growth occurs, it's really important that the board grows along and changes along with that growth. So it's very interesting. Nonprofits do the same thing that we as humans do individually. For example, being a parent to a 2-month-old baby is very different than being a parent for a 5-year-old, which is different than being one for a 10-year-old, and extremely different than being one for a teenager, shall we just say, right? We all know that parents need to constantly adjust how they parent as their child matures. But the overall concept of being a parent remains the same, which is why those 7 responsibilities remain the same, but how they're demonstrated is going to look very different. Likewise, it's important to pay attention to your nonprofit's life cycles, and as the roles and the activities of the board need to change. And if these changes aren't made, then there can be a disconnect between what the organization needs from its board and what it's actually being done. And that's where you get a push-pull, growth struggles, issues, problems with the executive director, either saying you're micromanaging, or you're horning in on my side, or the board going, well, I don't know what's going on, or we used to do it this way, and you get into all of those issues if you're not cognizant that things are gradually changing. So what may happen is that you could have a fairly mature organization that now needs policy and fundraising help from its board, but the board doesn't understand that, and it still wants to continue to control the operational activities, just as they did when things were starting up, and it was everyone's hands on deck as needed. Or you may have a board for a younger organization that's very hands-off because everybody on that board has been on other boards for larger organizations, and they say, oh, we just do policy and governance, Whereas you're a very tiny, small organization, and no, we need you to do policy and governance and the 7 responsibilities, and you need to put the stamps on the letters and come in and write checks on Saturday and pick the napkin colors. So you can, just to use an absurd example, which I expect most of us have lived through. My husband joined as an executive director of a retirement community, and he came away from the very first board meeting saying the biggest topic for discussion was who was going to make the cookies for the next meeting. That was unique. He was just like, what? This is going to take a while. Because one of the things is that many times people assume if they've been on another board, you go on to your second or third board and you assume it's just like that one. And it really isn't. And that's why having that board job description that you give to prospective board members is extremely important, because that also is going to need to be changed as your organization grows so that people know what they're getting into. So we're going to look and talk about each phase of this cycle and discuss some of the different symptoms and the ways it might look. And as we do, please try to think of your organization and see where you think it might fit. Whoops, it went the wrong way. Oh God, there's another one. Anyway, okay. So this one shows 6 different stages, thankfully in different colors, but anyway. And these are all in your book. So the first stage of a nonprofit is core development and startup, or the phase of creativity, as it is up here. And this is often when an organization is being founded, and it's usually founded by one person, such as you, or it's founded by a team or a group of people come together and say, we need to do this for the community. And in this phase, your organization is developing your programs and your strategies to implement your mission, and you're doing a really good job. Generally, you're beginning and you're getting traction, and program delivery is your focus. It's really like an entrepreneur starting a business, which of course is what a nonprofit is. It's a business. So in this phase, you're going to form a board of directors, and that often comprises friends, family members, neighbors, close associates of the founder or founders. The problem with this is that nepotism, which is when you have family members either on the staff and on the board, or family members on a board, is that nepotism is not considered a nonprofit best practice. It's very common in the for-profit world. Family businesses where one person's the CEO and somebody, the sister's the CFO and the brother-in-law's the marketing director. That's very common in a for-profit family business especially. Not considered okay in a nonprofit. And it's really sticky to then get people asked, once you realize this, to then ask people to leave. So if you're in that situation, if you know there are relatives on a board, try to figure out some very diplomatic ways to have that stop. And if you're starting an organization, the easiest way to deal with it is not to do it at all. You can still use those family members as advisors, as coaches, as helpers, as volunteers, just don't put them on the board. So my suggestion is in when you're forming that new nascent board, and looking at your own boards now even, think more broadly about the skills and the networks that you need, rather than going for the low-hanging fruit of, who does my daughter play cards with, and maybe I could get that person. In the startup phase, in this creativity phase, communications and management is often very informal, and board members will perform a lot of the tasks that we would typically think of as being staff. The next phase, in the phase of direction or infrastructure development and growth, your organization is developing more robust and diverse infrastructure. You're starting to grow because you need to support the core programs, and you need to be able to help them grow as well. So management is going to become a little more sophisticated, and your operations are going to become more systematized and efficient. It's going to be less seat of the pants. It's going to be more, these are our programs, this is how we run, this is when we do them. And the board needs to shift from this hands-on focus, which it did before because everybody was needed in this hands-on capacity, now to a stronger focus on oversight, because your organization has become a little stronger and more diverse. You need to be thinking about fiscal issues and policy issues, and gradually becoming more involved in fundraising, because now you have strong programs that are worthy of being funded. Generally speaking, a lot of funders and large donors may shy away from funding an initial startup organization because you don't have a track record and they're not really confident you really are going to be able to accomplish what you say you can. But when you're in this phase, people are like, oh yeah, I know about that program, or yeah, you've been doing this a while. I think you'd be worthy of an investment. So we need more activity on the board to support those kinds of activity. And you want to be moving into a more systematized routine of board recruitment, where it's less informal than it was before, and you're more thinking about, we need people with these specific skills, and we want a diverse board, so we need people with these demographics. We need this age span, we need these networks. You're thinking more in terms of future, because now you're sort of confident the organization maybe is going to make it, so now you're also thinking about the future. In the next phase, this phase of delegation, or mission impact, I call it, or maturity, in this phase, the organization's programs are really significantly accomplishing the mission. Your programs are expanded, initiatives are being taken on because you have the infrastructure to accomplish them, and often your staff is going to need to grow at this point because there's just more work that needs to be done, so you're going to see more staff positions being created. What it looks like, what this board needs to look like at that point, is you need to, again, be expanding even more to include more outsiders, more people who aren't part of that initial circle. The staff are becoming more professional. And again, the new board members are being added because of their expertise, not because they're buddies with somebody involved in the board. Less focus on operations, more focus on policy. The board may have difficulty thinking strategically. They may still be in more of a reactive mode. They may have difficulty projecting into the future because they've been so used to thinking about how are we going to pay the bills or how are we going to survive. And at this point, during this phase, the board is in the process of transitioning more into that governance role, and they may not really understand what that is. So they may need training to help them step into that governance role. And that's what some of the workshops today are all about, is what is governance? I mean, it's like this catchword, but what is it really, as opposed to what the board was doing perhaps in the first couple of phases. And at this point, you also want to start creating standing committees, because the work of the organization has become bigger and more complex, and you want to provide greater insight and oversight for those various areas, which now the board really can't do because there's so much going on. So the beauty of standing committees is several layers. I'm a real proponent of standing committees. It's an indication of maturity of an organization when a board says, you know, we really need to start forming these. And typically they're about finance, fundraising, human resources if you have a fairly large staff. You could have a market as separate. If you do a lot of marketing and a lot of social media, you might want a separate marketing committee. You definitely want to create a governance committee, a nominating committee, which is responsible for ensuring new board members and recruiting. And the beauty about standing committees is that you can invite non-board members onto those committees to expand. This expands your network, expands the number of people who are available to help you with fundraising and marketing and being an ambassador, because there are new voices coming in. And being a member of a standing committee, if you're a non-board member, also is a great incubator for future board members, because you get to work with a person for a year or 2 or 3 on a committee, and you go, is this person full of soup and a bunch of hot air, in which case we're going to keep them on the committee, or this person's really cool and they love what we're doing, so let's put them on the board as well. So the other beautiful thing about standing committees, as your organization becomes more complex, is rather than there being, say, 15 minutes at a board meeting to talk about finance, there's an hour-and-a-half meeting every couple of months by the finance committee just to talk about finance. So you can see how that provides a lot more oversight, a lot more opportunity for discussion and questions. Yes?
Are there vastly different legal implications for standing committee members versus board members?
That's a great question. Yeah, those 7 issues that we mentioned at the beginning don't apply at all to standing committee members. There would be some, such as maybe confidentiality, that you'd want to keep, you know, meeting conversations confidential, but there isn't the fiscal and legal obligation, and likewise there's no need for directors and officers insurance for committee members as there is for a board, because you're not doing things that are legally or fiscally tying you. So it's usually much easier actually to recruit people to standing committees than it is to the board, because they basically are going to one meeting every couple months. Basically that's what they're doing, maybe helping out in between times if there's a need, but they're not doing a couple of meetings, they're not doing all of those other requirements.
So this, I guess I'm a little unclear on standing committees.
Okay.
They're going to be more involved with like the operations
Yes.
of the organization.
Yes,
Gotcha.
they are, absolutely, which enables the board then to focus on that governance and policy piece. So that's part of that growth, which is why in this phase, you want to start building those standing committees, which frees the board up to do this other stuff.
From a legal mindset, look at them as more like a volunteer at the organization.
Yes, because a lot of standing committees actually do that hands-on stuff that may, you know, like the napkin colors. Shoot me now. Or who's making the cookies. I mean, you know, standing committees can talk about that stuff for a little bit of time. But so many of them do hands-on things, like you might find in a fundraising committee that people are willing to come in and write notes on appeal letters, personalized notes on an appeal letter and from a committee member. You don't want a board member doing that, and if they want to do that, that's a red flag. Also, so I'll come in and put those stamps on. No, you need to be doing this. But that's another nice thing about standing committees, especially if you have a small staff, they can really supplement the work the staff can do, and it's appropriate for that group. Yeah.
And your standing committees aren't forever? Or is it just, it's
Well,
focus directed for a particular?
No, that's a great question. That would be called an ad hoc committee,
Okay.
ADHOC,
Right.
which is a committee that's formed just for a specific purpose, time limited.
Right.
Like we're doing a special event in 6
Right,
months,
right.
join this committee.
Right.
Or we're planning a major expansion of our building, we need to form a building committee, no one on the board has these skills, so
But
let's form a building.
your finance committee would be like a standing committee.
You find it, these are committees, generally they're mentioned even in your bylaws.
In your bylaws, that's right.
And these are
Yeah.
permanent committees that are established. And it's great to have a board member be a chair of a standing committee, because that provides direct link from the work of the committee to the board. But it's not essential. If you have no one on the board who, and hopefully this isn't the case, but if you have no one on the board who's either has, say, fundraising experience or has the time to guide a committee, then you can also have a non-board member be a chair as well. It is good, though, to have a board member, or at least be a member of the committee, and that's usually a requirement of board membership, is that they join at least one
committee.
Right, right. Yeah, and it just vastly expands your ability to get work done to have these committees, because you can spend, say, half an hour at a fundraising committee meeting just reviewing what does your boilerplate grant proposal look like. Let's review this, I want your input, and if you have the right people on that committee who have that expertise, you're going to get some really good feedback. That's one of the things when I was back 1,000 years when I was a development director, one of the first things I did with the development committee that I formed was to bring the grant proposal, because we use this language in a lot of different things, and read it and give me feedback, you know. So that would not be appropriate at a board meeting, but at a committee meeting it's totally appropriate. We had a huge discussion once about how much to charge for a special event. But anyway, that was an appropriate thing for the development committee to chew on. One of our big issues, and this was a million years ago, was it was a cultivation event, but it was a dinner. Do we charge for a ticket or not? And they went back and forth, and all right, whatever. But it gave them the opportunity to talk about it. Any other questions on standing committees? So there's a big transition that happens in this phase of delegation to phase of consolidation. Again, this is a big transition from this management board into more of a governance fundraising board. And as the organization progresses, you're either going to have a lot of pain if you haven't progressed with the board to that point, or it's going to be obvious to you that you need to make some shifts in the board. You're going to need more maturity and more sustainability for the organization, and your board size often will need to increase, and the diversity, again, which I've been talking about, the diversity on the board is going to need to increase. Again, your focus here is policy, oversight, fundraising. Ideally, members are clear about what that is and how that works, how that looks, so that they're not in the weeds, and hopefully there's someone on the board who can call it out if it happens, because of course it's going to happen. You're going to fall back into bad habits, or it's going to be too comfortable to say, well, who did you hire for that position? And it's like, no, that's the CEO's job, stay out of it. It's going to be, someone's going to need to call that out when it does happen. You're going to need more of a team approach on your staff at this point as you've grown. There's going to be strong leadership also at this point to ensure that everybody is moving in the same direction. So you can see some of the issues here, some of the problems listed down here at the bottom. Coordination breaks down, focus on individual projects, fiefdoms. You need strong overall direction because there's more people out there working independently. You've got committees working independently. You've got staff members. You have maybe middle-level managers directing the work. And you've lost that tight maybe control that you had earlier when your organization was smaller. So it's really important that there's a strong leadership feeling to keep everybody going in the same direction. And then, as the organization continues to go, you're into a phase of consolidation and collaboration. The organization, because it's gotten even bigger, it's going to develop more collaborations, strategic alliances and partnerships, and even mergers. At this point, a mature organization may be poised and ready to merge with a less mature organization that's maybe doing similar work, but doesn't have the footprint that the bigger one does. You saw that, we were just talking about Good Samaritan, and they are a homeless shelter, and Bridge of Hope was an organization that provides support services for women, but it's not a shelter. It provided women with temporary and then permanent housing. So the two organizations were working in the same areas. Bridge of Hope was having increasing difficulty with fundraising. Good Samaritan was moving right along very strongly, and Bridge of Hope was like, we're having all kinds of other issues where we need to make big changes. And so they merged together and became Good Samaritan Services, right, rather than Good Samaritan Shelter. And the Bridge of Hope services beautifully joined what Good Sam was doing, and so now they're even a more robust organization with a bigger footprint, providing sort of a continuum of homelessness services. So that was an example of actually two very mature, robust organizations choosing to come together to make one more solid one. Yeah.
And what I would say from my experience, both CBC and then what I learned from Good Samaritan too, between the phase of consolidation and phase of collaboration alliance, there might be what I'll call the crisis of sustainability.
Yes.
And so that one way to sustain the organization might be through the collaboration, the alliance.
Right.
The other way might be to go back to the beginning.
It could be.
And something needed to change, I guess, in both organizations there. But, and that now, I guess Good Sam is 4.5 or 4 years.
4 or 5 years
so
into this.
There's things that I don't think that the board is now I wouldn't say questioning, but we're dealing with. We're back into that growth phase there in terms of, how many, buildings do we own? Because Good Sam owns the buildings for both the emergency shelters and now even into the temporary housing. and then the alliances with different organizations, because if you want to provide that transitional housing and then help those people who are early in the homeless spectrum get into affordable housing, well, we know about the affordable housing crisis here in Chester County. So it's how can you sustain then your mission that you have adopted if you don't necessarily have the physical resources to do that?
Yeah.
And what does
What does
that
that
mean
look
for
like?
the organization? Yeah, in
Yeah.
terms of then do you go forward on your own, or do you look at more collaborations, or do you then scale back?
Well, I take it everything changed, right? The board changed when you merged, when the merger, and you looked at resources.
Again, that predated my joining
Oh,
the
okay.
TAMS board, but I think a number of those who were on the Bridge of Hope board, because they're Lancaster County based,
Some came on.
stepped off.
Some stepped
the
off
board.
because it was a practical matter of each board was like 12 or 15
Yeah.
people. So it's a
Yeah.
practical matter if you really don't want to have a 30-member board. So several of the Bridge of Hope people did join, but a number of them didn't.
Yeah, and then also then having your board represent the communities and the populations that you serve, as well
Right.
too. So, so there was some, restructure, and then the skills,
Right.
right now we didn't
Well,
have
you had
anyone.
mentioned the resources that what each organization brought to the table and what that merger would you weren't there, but.
Right,
Yeah, but that would
So-
look like,
right.
whether what direction you were gonna go as far as
Right.
meeting the needs of the community.
yeah, so I mean,
Communities, I guess.
and it is something may look good on paper or in
Right,
theory for
right.
both the sustainability of the organization as well as the missions, but then you've got to still be aware that it's not over. Really, the work is just beginning, I guess,
Yeah,
once the
right.
merger takes place,
Right.
and can you sustain that new organization and everything that you want to do, back to what your mission is.
Exactly.
A new mission.
Yeah, because
organization.
actually a merger in that kind of a situation where it was basically two sort of equal organizations, it wasn't like a big organization gobbling up a tiny little one. It really was creating a new entity where you do need to go back to some of these initial things of really getting a solid understanding of what is the mission, what is the cause, what is it going to look like. So some of those program development things that you see in the far left-hand side and the phase of direction of procedures had to be changed, personnel policies had to be changed and revised because Bridge of Hope was using one and Good Samaritan was using another, and so we needed to combine elements of both. There were certain policies that one organization had, the other didn't, that were good to have, that needed to be adopted. So all of that stuff really needed to be looked at yet again, in addition to creating a new management structure with mid-level managers and all of that. So it was very different. Yeah, it basically, so then you're back to exactly what you're saying, then progressing again through some of these stages. Yeah, it's interesting when that kind of opportunity, when a merger kind of thing hits, it does absolutely have ripple effects. But if it's done really well, it can provide a greater clout for the organization and more funding opportunities actually, because there's less funding competition. So it's often clearer, your mission's clearer often as a result. It was a great comment on that, yeah, for sure. So teamwork in this final couple of phases, you need really strong teamwork. Again, the middle managers need to be really clear in their roles and their abilities. A major change there often is now the executive director isn't supervising everyone, and so not everyone has access to the ED, and that can create culture worries or problems, or I always used to go to Mary for that. Well, sorry, you gotta go to me. Ooh, that kind of thing. And then the executive director loses some of that hands-on in the weeds work that maybe they were doing with their staff. Now they're more into a phase, the way the board needs to be, of overall supervision, policy, governance looking with their middle managers, not in the weeds about the specifics of what's going on. There's more reliance at these phases on reporting because you have less hands-on awareness of what's going on. You need better communications, maybe more frequent communication tools, those kinds of things. And one of the issues that can come up with a board at this phase is that they may feel they're too hands-off at this point, because they're relying on reporting. They're not coming to the organization most likely and volunteering, they're no longer answering the phones or doing what other things, they even implementing programs that they might have done a few years before. They may feel they're too hands-off and that they've lost touch with the mission and they don't understand what's going on. And the danger of that feeling is that they may try to slide back into their previous method of being a board member. And that's again where you can get into this sort of messy area where they're maybe even directing staff over the head of the executive director. Has anybody ever encountered that one? No, you haven't, Melena? You're lucky.
But I've seen it.
You've seen it, yeah, where they're actually going over their head and talking to a staff member and saying, do this, because they want to get that handhold again, but they're doing it in an inappropriate way. Yes?
I have a question regarding the volunteering that you talked about, where you started out with hands-on, everybody's on deck and everything like that, and then things kind of gradually, because you're growing and you're getting the staff to do, whatever. But my thing that I just sensed with the short time that I've worked on other boards and things like that is that I see us as being active. And that's my personality. I want to be active. I want to know what's going on. I want to
Sure.
volunteer where I can. And others may not. Well, I'm just a board member. I come to the meetings. I read the reports. And I give my money. And basically, that's basically what I want to do. So who kind of like sets the tone for that awareness, that the opportunity to volunteer and help, you could be on a committee and you organize and everything like that, but where's
I think that comes first off from the board chair, and it also comes from the board job description, where joining the board you see this is the box you need to be in. We really don't need you over here because we've got other volunteers or staff over there. However, if you really want to volunteer, then the tricky part with that is that if you're volunteering as a board member in a program run by staff, they're going to know you're a board member, and staff have funky ways of interacting with board members. Do you want to talk about that, Melanie? You're nodding your head.
It's just like every time when we have like end of the year celebration or something relevant happening throughout the year, and the staff members know the board members are going to be there. Somehow they don't feel comfortable.
Yeah.
And not for all of them, but usually, and that's part of what we're trying to really set the tone of, in both ways, for board members as well as for staff members. Technically, everyone should feel comfortable.
Yeah.
But
but the staff know that the board is their boss's boss.
correct.
And they sometimes look at board members as being like, if not gods, at least parents.
absolutely
And somewhat critical, not nice parents. So that would be the potential risk of volunteering in a program if it was run by staff, is that they might either defer to you
Right.
or just not see you as equal among the other half dozen volunteers.
Right.
So you'd want to be cognizant of that stuff
Yeah.
and figuring out ways you could volunteer
Yeah.
that would be appropriate.
Yeah.
You just want to think about it.
I'm finding my way because I've had people make,
Yeah.
you're a spy, and I'm like,
Yeah, exactly.
not a spy.
See, there's an example of that kind of thinking. You're a spy. It's like, dang, no, I'm not.
Or I can tell you this because I know you will.
You will pass it
You will
on.
pass it on.
Or, yeah.
And I don't mind that, but
Well, it's still a mixed
It's
roles.
mixed
It's
role,
not
yeah.
good. Yeah.
Yeah.
Question.
But just to kind of take that discussion a point further, I mean, I feel a challenge with my board members that I want them to feel like they know what's going on.
Yes.
That they
Yes.
feel a rewarding kind of relationship
Yes.
with the organization, that they're not just basing their advice based on reports from
Yes.
third parties, but they're observing how things are done.
Mm-hmm.
They're kind of taking part in it as a person, so that may not be a full-time kind of volunteering role, but I also don't want board members to feel like they're at arm's length from what's going on in the field. So I don't know if you want to comment on that. How do you kind of bridge that?
That was actually gonna be my next talking
Oh,
point,
okay,
which is
perfect.
totally awesome, right? Because that is one of the dangers, is that the board members have lost that firsthand experience. They are relying more on reports. And it's really important at that point for you to creatively create appropriate ways for the board to connect with the mission. Now, one very simple way that organizations do is they put the mission statement right on the agenda for the board meetings, right at the top. And member of the board will read that mission statement. You'd be surprised how many board members may not even know what the mission of the organization is. They may know generally what we do, we're a homeless shelter, we're an animal shelter, this or that, but they may not that you need to go out and be able to recite it. And hopefully these days we're making mission statements a little shorter. Remember, they used to be ginormous run-on sentences that had 15 semicolons and took a paragraph, and when you got to the end I have no idea where I started. But we're working, in my consulting work certainly, I'm working and encouraging organizations to make simple ones. But that review of the mission, and then another thing that organizations do that I think works really well is they'll invite a staff member, a volunteer, maybe a recipient of your service, to come to the board meeting and just talk about what they do or what they've seen for like 5 minutes, 2 minutes. To just tell people, this is for a staff member, this is what I did this week, this is the family I helped. Or for a family member to say, this is how I was helped by your organization. Or, it's an animal welfare organization, bring a puppy. Here's who doesn't love puppies, but anyway. But do some little thing like that in the board meeting as well. It's time well spent. And then alternatively, or in addition to, I would consider creating, and every organization is different, and the appropriateness with which you can do these things is going to vary based on the work you do. But if there's some way to invite the board to come and see the work, to come and see what's happening. For example, to come and see one of your home repair sites. But to do it maybe as a group. This is the board coming, so it's clear who's who, and there aren't any of those funky things going on like they're here to spy on us. No, the board just needs to come and see the house after it's done, for example, and talk to the homeowner about how great it was, and see the before and after pictures. Or try to creatively, and maybe make those opportunities possible like a couple times a year for people to really touch in, because they are going to lose that initial all hands on deck tangible connection with things. But that's appropriate. It's like when you have a 2-month-old baby, you're aware of every breath it takes, right? By the time that kid's 15, that needs to look different. You have different, God forbid, everybody needs mental health care. But when they're 15, it looks different, and when they're 30, it looks different. So your involved level doesn't mean you're not still involved, doesn't mean you're not still a parent, it's just looking different.
I have a comment.
Yeah,
So
please.
one of the things that working with, being in the board, helping the Latino community.
Yeah.
I think that is very important for the people, the board, that kind of get a connection of the families that, we serve in. I think that what happens is you get in a board meeting and you talk about business, but we have to be, who we serve in. It's just
That's
we're
right.
not a number,
That's
it's a
right.
community that you need to know. And I think it's very important as a board member to kind of know who you're serving and kind of have a little bit of knowledge of that. And one of the things that happened in our community with the school district, and where we live in the Allen Grove School District, the teachers were coming, a lot of them from other places, and they really didn't know what kind of children they were serving, and they couldn't understand what was happening. So I think, what they did very exciting, that actually she is and one of the speakers, as Ortega Moran, Natalie, she actually did a field trips. So they actually, what they did is they put all the teachers in buses and they went around the community to get an idea of how their children. We work with a lot of children with the mushroom industry, and it's just to get an idea who you're serving to be able to do it better.
That's right.
And I think as an organization that regardless of what we serve in, we have to know what is the goal and to do it better way.
Yeah, so providing those opportunities for board members, absolutely, because you may feel that transition happening. board members may start saying, board meetings are boring. Somebody said that to me just the other day. He was trying to plan a board retreat. And he was like, I have to make this fun. He was talking to me, I have to make this fun. He said, what I'm hearing from everybody is board meetings are boring. And if the board meeting is boring, you know, that's the last thing. Who's going to want to volunteer your time for something that's boring and dull? So you need to keep your finger on the pulse with that. Yeah.
I just want to share, so something we actually started implementing about a year and a half ago, right after the pandemic, is we created like breakfast with the board. So we do that quarterly, and so we offer that to the staff members. It's led by the leadership team members, and so we bring breakfast. We have different offices around the county, so we pretty much plan ahead of time. You know, this one is going to be at a postal site or the center in South
Nice.
County. And the staff feels, okay, formally I can have that relationship with the board members. It's not mandatory because sometimes board members cannot all come, but they know that, okay, I can go to the next one. And also for board members, it's been incredible. It's part of the engagement aspect of it because then they learn directly, they hear the stories, and then they learn about, you know, what are you working on, what is the latest thing. And then the other thing we implemented that has been very successful, we've been trying to use the expertise of different board members. So we have a board president, she's a CPA, and she conducts financial, she facilitates financial workshops. She did one for our staff members.
Oh,
And then
nice,
next week
yeah.
we have an immigration attorney, Lindsay, Sweet, and she comes and she provides immigration just for our staff members. So it has actually implemented a dynamic that the staff members can actually ask questions and
Yeah.
share with a purpose, but they don't really even know what the main
Yep.
is.
Oh, I love that. Yeah.
Doing that.
That's a
We're trying to
great,
figure out a way to bring in other people, like our advisors, not just the board.
That's right.
But bring them all together and our volunteers. They
Yep.
have enough.
bring them together. That's a great idea. Yeah.
Look, you know, as a board, people are like, we get the thanks for serving on the board, volunteering our time. And I think sometimes what doesn't get recognized or overlooked then is that really the thanks needs to go to the staff. Because they're the ones who are providing the service. And that the more opportunities, again, for the staff to interact with the board, it's also the opportunity for the board to acknowledge that.
That's
and
right.
the staff need to hear directly from the board, not just from their CEO, you know, the value of their work. And certainly, you know, for the CVC, because there's so many different aspects to what we do, and everyone has a specialized role, we can't possibly understand, you know, everything to be able
Right.
to tell those stories to a potential other board member, a potential donor.
That's
something like
right.
that. And then the other comment too is when it comes time for our strategic plan or for funding priorities, it really does help to know where the staff kind of feel on that and understand to the extent that the board can, the detail of that so that we know how to prioritize what is going to be some competing initiatives and competing goals.
Yeah.
So, but I think we really do need to work, and again, not working around the CEO or ED,
Right.
but working with them
Collaboratively.
and having the board really believe that it is important for us to engage with the staff as well and make it a collaborative environment, not a threatening one.
Right, exactly. And that's one of the reasons also, great comment, that it's so important when you do strategic planning that you include your staff. Because that's often one of the best ways for board and staff to learn about each other and to collaborate. I remember I did strategic planning with Alex's Lemonade Stand about a long time ago. It was their first strategic plan. And at that time, Alex's Lemonade Stand had these muckety-muck CEOs on their board. I mean, they had Volvo and Rita's Water Ice and Macy's and a huge Center City PR firm. They were, you know, loaded with these dudes. And the staff were like all under 30, beginning in their careers. And the board and the staff thought that were afraid of the board, and the board thought the staff were a bunch of kids, which they, you know, were in that respect. They were the age of their kids. So when we brought everyone together to do strategic planning, and then when we divided up into committees to work on different sections of the plan, and those committees included board and staff members together, they got to sit around the table together for a couple hours and work on, well, what are what are our fundraising goals or what are our program goals. And the staff learned that the board were not so scary after all, and we're actually okay dudes. And the board learned these aren't these little kids with wet behind the ears. These kids really know what they're doing. And it created some really nice partnerships and collaborations, and I think it was empowering for both, because the board probably up to that point wasn't really confident that whoever was doing the work really knew what they were doing. And the staff were like, oh, they're out there and who cares about them. So whenever you can, and that was an appropriate situation for them to engage. So that maintaining that connection for the board with your mission is really important, but you need to be careful how you do it, because you don't want them slipping back. And often when you're in that phase, having some training programs such as today about what does governance look like in a mature organization as opposed to the way you might have been 10 years ago. And that's also another one of the values of term limits for your board members, where it's like, you're on like several terms for a couple of years duration each and then you go off, because that helps to create that constant cycling of new people coming on. And it helps to break up that feeling of, well, we always did it that way, or we've done it this way and you can't change it, or that kind of resistance because you've got new people coming on all the time. And then the last phase, and I don't know if there's one of these chart things with, it doesn't have the terminal or turnaround here, stage 6 and stage 7 on that chart. Talks about when an organization gets stagnant, which potentially can happen. And it gets stagnant when it's no longer really serving the community needs, or when there's a disconnect between what its stated mission is and what it really is doing. And it's critical to realize that, because you need to, if you want to keep going, you need to do renewal, you need to turn around. You need to avoid slipping into these two categories. You need to renew yourself. And one example of that actually was that merger with Bridge of Hope. Bridge of Hope at the time was part of a larger national organization called Bridge of Hope National. And it was like they were an affiliate. And Bridge of Hope National had an extremely, very successful, but very specific program delivery model. And the Bridge of Hope local here in Coatesville was finding the women we're serving are not fitting this model. This is a great model, and it worked 10 years ago, it worked 15 years ago. It's not working today. The people we're seeing need other things that this model doesn't address. And so there was tremendous push-pull between the affiliate and the national. And as a result, the affiliate, because it was no longer able to serve community needs because of the limitations of this model, decided they needed to break away. So that was part of the motivation. There was, we need to stop being a Bridge of Hope affiliate and become either our own organization or merge with someone else. So it was their recognition that this model is not serving our clients well that was part of the motivation behind the merger. So that's an example. Girl Scouts is another example. When I was a Girl Scout, they taught knot tying and fire building. Well, I'll tell you today, I don't think they're doing that anymore today. Today it's life skills, it's employment, it's building a resume, it's keeping yourself safe, it's all kinds of other things. Girl Scouts today looks nothing like it did, I won't say how many years ago. And that's an example of an organization that reinvented themselves to keep pace with what's going on. So what the symptoms of that, if you're in an organization that's struggling with that, is you may experience either no board turnover or conversely a lot of board turnover, because people feel, what am I volunteering for? This doesn't matter. Board members may become really sluggish and less involved. They've lost passion and commitment because nothing really is happening. The organization may be bogged down in an outdated structure, such as that was what was going on with Bridge of Hope. They were being bogged down by this other structure. And you may have a situation where either the executive director feels he or she is doing everything and the board isn't doing anything, or the board may try to deal with it by being micromanaging again and driving the executive director crazy. So that can be sort of what happens in that difficulty stage. And on all of these stages, what's important to realize is to realize it's happening and to talk about it. And if you need to bring in outside help, to do it. To not just try to ignore that this issue's going on and that things have changed. What's really important is to call it out and deal with it. And transparency and communication can go a long way towards helping you through these things. And then ultimately, the end, if you don't handle that, the organization most likely is going to need to close, or again, is going to need to merge. And those things are just really important to handle if that is in fact what you need to do. But as we've gone through these, say, 7 stages, can you identify where your organization is? Has anybody had an aha moment of, oh gee, I think we're there? You want to share? Yeah.
Say phase of direction.
Phase of direction.
And we're talking about, the funny part is we're talking about pieces of the future phases.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yes.
different venue, right? Those types of things.
Yes.
And then you kind of look at like, okay, well, there's a sequence of things maturity have to happen.
Yeah.
You know? So it'll be a good discussion when we take this back.
Good,
Yeah.
good, yeah. And one point I forgot to mention, and I'm glad that you did, was these, like with growth, you may mature in one area, not in another at the same time. Like a child may become very smart intellectually, but their physical abilities aren't matching, or vice versa. So you could be very much in here on the phase of direction, but you're thinking towards phase of delegation, you're thinking about growing, so it isn't just obviously cut and dry. That's a great comment. Who else can have a handle on where you are? How about, yeah?
We're also very much phase of direction, but maybe leaking into the phase of delegation a little bit. I think one thing that's been, and there's definitely some learnings to take out of this, but we've been talking about this.
That's excellent.
Our current board president, provided quite a few articles.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's, as a board and a board member, it's really helpful to be aware of,
Yes.
where you're at in this cycle.
Yeah.
How to get to the next one.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Calling it out, talking about it. Absolutely. How about good neighbors? You were saying you were going through some of this. Where do you think you guys are?
Well, I do think we're probably delegation into consolidation, so we've got a little more maturity. I mean, I do think, just on your point, I almost feel like you need a historian alongside you to kind of tell the story, where we've been,
Yep.
where we are, and then that helps people think of where they're going. But you need somebody to tell your own story well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think that's a great point, because part of what makes us sometimes resistant to change is we're afraid we're going to lose something. We're going to lose some of that great creativity in the startup, or some of that great stuff. And doing that would help keep that from happening. Yeah.
There's some of that great institutional knowledge.
Yeah.
A couple things that our board maybe accidentally, but I'll take it however it comes, did properly is, the turnover in a really effective manner. Our last board president before the current one, she did an awesome job setting us up, building the bridges from creativity to direction.
Yeah.
And laying the groundwork.
That's
and
great.
then moving on.
Yeah.
Because she was the she had her hands in everything. She was doing a lot of what's now staff work.
Yep.
And it can be difficult to let go of that.
Yep.
Yeah.
And
you have to be able to let go of the right stuff and hold on. And that's why I think you have to start putting a lot of things in writing and making sure that you can create that handoff.
Yes, because as you mature, you start really needing what I call that hit by the bus book. You really need that. What if I get hit by the, we have institutional knowledge with a founder usually, or, and what if that person, I like to say, goes off to grow pineapples, you're going to lose it. So yeah, you need that hit by the bus book. Absolutely. That's great. Well, thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you.